Hello, everybody. Welcome to the final day of the TSL Partner Power Summit. I'm Diane Brady. I'm going to be moderating, so you will not hear, hopefully, very much from me. I'm simply here to ask the questions and also convey some of your questions. So hello to everybody out there on Facebook Live. And I don't know what we'd call it, perhaps Zoomville, perhaps, gives it a nice Dr. Seuss tone. We have a terrific conversation today around engaging with science, motivated in large part, I believe, by what Greta Thunberg talked about with regard to listening to the science. I'm here in New York City. We here in America, of course, know that science is something that can be politicized. It can be debated. And so I think listening to the science is actually a very powerful message right now. So I'm going to first go with the video, but let me tell you who our speakers are that are with you here today on the screen, and then we will come back for a conversation and also very much invite you to join in the conversation. We have with us, and you can just wave if people can't guess, we have Gitanjali Rao. There you are, Gitanjali. Are you in Colorado at the moment? Where are you?
I am. I'm in Denver.
She is in Denver. She was named America's top young scientist a few years ago for I believe you were inventing a device that detected lead in water after Flint. And
that's that back there.
And she has spoken very much since on the power of science. And I believe you've probably invented several things since too. So nice to see you here. We also have Barry Murrer. Barry, hi. Hello. He is the chairman of the Trust for Sustainable Living and the former head of Johnson Matthey Technology Center. And last and certainly not least, of course, Yukio Himiyama, nice to see you, president of the International Geographic Union and also, I guess, professor emeritus, is that correct?
Yes.
At Hokkaido University, and he has an appropriately academic background. They're great to see you. So let us start first to set off the tone with a video from Barron Joseph Orr, who is the lead scientist at the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. And after that, we will come back and hear from our panelists. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, my name is Barron Orr. I am the lead scientist of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. UNCCD has two sister conventions, climate change and biodiversity. We focus on land and life, yours, mine, every plant, every animal. Land is where most of the excess carbon in the atmosphere actually belongs, in our soils and plants. Your objective to build meaningful partners is the same as ours, but each of us has a specific role. UNCCD helps countries to develop the best policies for the land. The doing is the job of partners. UN agencies, civil society organizations, companies, and people. Partners put those policies to work so our land can support people, nature, and the climate. And do we have work to do? 2 billion hectares of previously productive land is now degraded, an area larger than South America. There are many causes, but behind all of them is you and me, what we eat, what we wear, where new neighborhoods are built. Land sustains us, but too often high consumer demand leads to unsustainable land use. On 17 June, the entire world celebrated land with a focus on food, feed, and fiber. Fiber is the stuff you are wearing right now. But fast fashion, clothing bought and discarded like fast food, often wastes land. Did you know that 2,700 liters of water are needed to produce a single t-shirt? That's enough to fill 30 bathtubs. Put another way, we are eating and wearing our land. But how we've done it has put our future food security at risk. Habitats are being lost. Precious carbon is escaping to the atmosphere. So what can you do about it? Sticking with the fiber theme, be more careful about what you buy or throw out. Swap clothes with your friends. Buy less and reuse what you have. Make new pieces out of used clothes. Opt for clothes made from recycled or organic fabric. Everyone can do something. Today, on behalf of the UNCCD, I wish you all great success as you tackle many important issues. We will be rooting for the teams arguing that protecting land through sustainable consumption and production is necessary to provide a future for your children and mine. Your choices matter. Never underestimate your power as individuals and together as a generation to create a more sustainable world. Thank you.
Diane, you're muted.
Muted. Here we are. Well, I'm certainly feeling very virtuous for wearing a 10-year-old dress. So this is not fast fashion. I'll have everybody out there know. Welcome back again. I think that's a terrific way to kick off our conversation on basically engaging with science, listening to the science. And I want to start by giving some opening remarks to our three terrific speakers here. It's a very powerful message. And again, for those of you who are new to Zoom, I'm sure you're not, but if you are, down in the chat function, we would welcome any questions from the audience. Also, if you're watching on Facebook Live, do your questions there. They will be conveyed over to us. So we hope for a very engaging conversation with you, the audience. I'm going to start, Gitanjali, with you. And talk a little bit about what listening to science, engaging with science means to you, and tell us a little more about your own background.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you guys a brief introduction about myself, I'm Gitanjali, I'm 14, and I'm an active science enthusiast and promoter of science and technology. And I love to build things, solve problems, and share ideas. And I believe that science can be a strong catalyst for social change. So I really like that question. What does listening to science mean to you? So I guess I would break it up into like 3 different parts. 1, figuring out what's wrong. 2, doing something about it. And then 3, promoting your solution to take action, and then just knowing what to expect in the future. So first of all, starting out with figuring out what's wrong. With the latest developments in science and technology, I don't want to say anything is possible because obviously not everything is possible, but there's a lot that is possible. So we can look towards, first of all, figuring out what some of the biggest problems we're facing, looking towards a sustainable future. And then looking after that is using it to build a solution, using the developments in science and tech in order to solve these problems that we're seeing. And then lastly, promoting the solution and promoting the science and tech behind it so that other people can take action. And it could be something just as simple as, you know, speaking at your local talent show about what recycling means to you, or sharing a piece of your artwork about, you know, how to protect beluga whales, right? It can literally be anything as long as you're using that, you know, that interior drive inside of you to solve a problem, and as well as that, using the latest developments in science and tech in order to create solutions that no one's thought of before.
Great, terrific, thank you. Professor Himiyama, I'm going to go to you next to talk about, again, lay the scene for us as to what you've been doing. And I also would love to hear your own sort of personal sense of how you've engaged with science, especially since we're talking to students. I think it's very powerful to know a little bit about the backgrounds of how everybody here sort of came to be fascinated with this themselves. So Professor Himiyama, take it away, and thank you, Gitanjali. We'll speak with you again in a minute.
Yeah, thank you very much to invite me to this meeting. And yes, science is not easy indeed, and it has many aspects. And recently, as you may know, International Science Council decided to define science as what we have called physical science and the human social science. and they decided to merge them. And so when the scientists now say science, it means both physical, natural, and human social sciences. And we are not sure if we can succeed in it, but at least IGU, International Geographical Union, which I'm the president, have been insisting that the natural scientists and the social scientists have to work together. And we are still trying that. And it's quite important because I know that the division of those two big groups of scientists are very bad, because if they work together, they can be much more powerful. Mm-hmm. And as a geographer, I know it very well from my experience. And I think the things are going to that way. For example, if you look at SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, many of the works we have to do are in more human and social science aspects. But if you look at Future Earth was originally created by International Science, Council for Science and the International Social Science Council. Future Earth mainly organizes what are called scientists, and many of those scientists are physical scientists. And now Future Earth and SDGs, in my eyes, are working quite well together, because they know that it's quite important. That the cooperation between science and, I should say, society and the politics and so on. So it's the advantage of both. And one more thing I have to emphasize is education for sustainable development, ESD. And I think the participants of this conference know it quite well. But the problem is those three things, three programs, SDGs, Future Earth, and ESD, should go together, have to cooperate more. But in my eyes, still there are some problems, especially in between ESD and Future Earth. That means the education and science, they have to be more close. Mm-hmm. And again, from my experience, I know it very well. I taught more than 3 decades in Hokkaido University of Education, and this is the largest education university in Japan. All the University of Education are national. Anyway, I know the importance of the scientists and educationists. And one example of the activities I have been doing is, as you can see, here is a poster of an environmental map contest, which I started with my friends and my students about 30 years ago. This is the 30th years anniversary, actually. So it's quite good.
Congratulations.
Yes, it's run by teachers, elementary school teachers, secondary school teachers, high school teachers, and university teachers, and the people outside schools. We all cooperate, work together, and students play very important roles in it. Unfortunately, this year, because of the COVID-19, students can't come to university, so they can't do anything, unfortunately. But this is only exception. But still, this year, we organize it, and we collect maps from all over the world. In recent years, mostly from Japan, but in the past, we got many, many maps from foreign countries, especially from China. And this is one example of the cooperation of many stakeholders, participants, and the children play very important roles. And very often the scientists think that scientists are there to supply the materials for education. But that's one, of course, important aspect, but it's not enough. And scientists if they have closer relation with education, they can learn a lot of things from children. I know it from the maps. Actually, they are each one is quite big indeed, more than 1 meter actually. But anyway, they are full of treasures. And it's very interesting, not only for children, but for the adults as well. And children can speak to their friends and to the adults, to the society. And very often they can issue a very strong message from those maps.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of things in it.
That's terrific. No, and I think we do want to definitely speak about the impact of the pandemic, because I think that is very much top of mind. So thank you very much for setting that up. I'm going to switch now to Dr. Murrer to give us some of your opening thoughts, whether it's what listening to the science means to you, and also just a little bit about your own background and how you're thinking about these issues. Thanks.
Thanks, Diane. Yes, I'm Barry. I'm a chemist. I trained as a chemist at university and stayed in chemistry all my life, really. I've been very lucky and privileged to be able to work at the cutting edge of research and development whilst I was at university and since. I've had some fascinating projects in my life, and I've really seen technology change dramatically over the years. Some of the things I've worked on have been precious metal recycling, which is called very important environmentally, cleaning up car exhaust, which again, hugely important environmentally, batteries and fuel cells for transportation. I'm reminded at one stage I was in charge of the antiviral research group in the 1980s, and it was a rather obscure area, antiviral technology. And this terrible disease called AIDS came along. There are resonances today, obviously, and it was quite extraordinary that within a year, drugs were developed and being tested in patients with some degree of success, and now AIDS is very much a controllable disease. So hopefully science can mobilize in the same way against coronavirus, and I'm sure it will. I'm very optimistic that it will. I think reflecting on my career in science, I think science evolves, and it's very difficult to take a snapshot of scientific understanding of an area on any one day. It will always change. That's the scientific method. So any finding is always debated and discussed, and people try to tear it down and build it up again. And to say this is our understanding, it is complete at any one stage, is completely wrong. And so everybody should be prepared for understanding the change, the scientific view, the change, and it will. But that's probably a good thing. And I think that's something science does very well. But it can be used as a weapon against science, in that some people say, well, you don't understand this, therefore you're wrong. And I think that's totally the wrong view. And helping to convince people about that is very important for all scientists.
Great. Well, thank you. One thing that strikes me as I think about engaging with science is I love now that we talk about STEAM and not STEM. And I say that as somebody who is not had a background in hard science, but does care very much about the planet, about the environment, about science. And I'm going to go to you, Gitanjali, about this, because I'm curious, especially I've been listening to a lot of the powerful debates this week, and congratulations to all the debaters. I think you did a terrific job. I'm also very wistful that you are doing it by Zoom, because to me, there's no greater pleasure than engaging face to face and seeing this wonderful planet of ours and seeing different cultures. But there does seem to be this divide that we have between science and the rest. And I think it feels increasingly like an artificial divide, especially as we talk about climate change and we talk about the impact that we're trying to have on the planet. And I want to speak to you, Gitanjali. Tell me a little bit about first your own, how you came to be interested in science, and how you think about it with regard to the many people you probably speak to and your peers who may consider themselves to be artists, writers, coming from other areas. Do you see this as a conversation that includes them? So And I like your background, by the way, very well chosen.
Yeah, well, for those of you who are super confused about what this is my device, Tethys, which helps to detect lead in drinking water. So that's what's going on back here.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. So essentially, I really like that question, especially because it's almost like the idea of having a left-sided brain and right-sided brain. Like we commonly discuss that you're either more artistic or you're more like data person. I can't come up with words right now, but like you're more scientifically related and you like just you're more of an analytical thinker. That's what it is. Or you're more of a someone who does a lot of like synthesis and drawing and art and other ideas. But I honestly don't believe in that aspect. Like, sure, maybe there might be some science, obviously, like we're talking about regarding that. And we have been talking about using the science and learning from the science. But the biggest thing that I've been thinking is sure, there might be theories and stuff that prove that or are working on proving that. But I think the idea that we need to get across now is that it's not just a scientific brain or it's not just a design thinking brain. We've come at the point where now more than ever, it's time to combine both and start using them, especially because our generation is growing up in a place where we're seeing problems that have never existed before. And now it's really our turn, all of our turn to take those first steps into something new and something innovative. Like, sure, we've been using an analytical method for so long or a design thinking method, but it's we really have to put that together. Like even for my device, the complete interior was all based on engineering. The base of the entire device is carbon nanotubes, which is completely chemistry related. The entirety of the outer shell was 3D design and 3D printing, which all falls under every single category in STEAM. Like you can't really differentiate anything anymore. They're all in one. You can find science in everything, or you can technically find everything in everything. They're all one thing. We've just chosen to pick out those ones. And on that note, I'm actually working on writing a book that essentially says the same thing, that goes through the innovation process but doesn't limit it to this like the scientific process, what we learn in school. It doesn't limit it to create a hypothesis, experiment with it, collect data, and then come up with a conclusion. It includes all these new tools and aspects to help students and even families and teachers think of ways to learn about and teach ways to connect design thinking and scientific thinking and connect both those left sides and right sides of your brain. So just to summarize everything that I'm saying, it's not different things anymore. It's one thing, and we really have to embrace that and appreciate that.
Great. So Professor Himiyama, I'm sure that resonates with you, but it does feel like the headlines around engaging with science that were top of mind for us last year have now been pushed aside as we talk about COVID-19 here in the US, as we talk about Black Lives Matter, all of which are critical issues and very much intertwined. But how do you feel about the engagement with science right now? I'd just love to hear about it, especially from the US. I feel we don't often get the international perspectives of how these are being talked about in other countries. So how do you feel the level of engagement, especially around issues like climate change, have been impacted by the pandemic?
Good question. I have been thinking about it every day, but one hint is in education. And one of the reasons why I am telling my scientist colleagues to pay more attention to ESD or education is education. If they have contact, they are involved in education, their brain will become more flexible and they'll become more open-minded. And if you go into ESD, actually you have to look at every aspect of science, indeed. Unlike in, say, physics or chemistry, or scientists are just very happy in those disciplines inside and a little careful to go out. I have been active in Science Council of Japan for quite a long time indeed. That Science Council has all the disciplines, not only natural science, but human science and so on, quite broadly minded. But most of the people are not very familiar with education. That's the weakest point of Science Council of Japan. So I established a committee on what I called Future Earth Education Committee, and it has been quite active indeed. And I think it contributed a lot to change the education in Japan, actually. But it took quite a long time to convince many scientists in Science Council of Japan to pay more attention to education. But if they go into education more, they are better prepared to face the new circumstances, such as COVID-19. Many scientists are just astonished. And then after some weeks, they started to think what they can do. But if you are more involved in ESD or education, they can see their setting much more broadly. And I think they can find, they have better chance to find their ways.
Mm-hmm. Great. Barry, do you want to, and I'm calling you Barry because you called yourself Barry.
Yes, right.
I would love to hear you sort of weigh in on this. And I'll say as the mother of 3 children, I do see visibly the pain and suffering and the disengagement that remote learning has had, especially in this area of science where so much of it is hands-on, so much of it is experimentation that is very, very difficult to replicate in a digital realm. You know, how do you feel the level of engagement, education, the conversation around science has shifted?
It's very, very hard, Diane. I interact very closely with the University of Cardiff Department of Catalysis Institute there, and essentially we've had to close the doors since middle of March. All experiments have stopped. Every single experiment has stopped, and it's unlikely to begin again for another probably 3 to 4 weeks. And when it does restart, it's going to be a very different world. It's going to need to be socially distanced. There's going to be shifts. There's going to be restrictions on total numbers. It's going to take a while for it to come back, I think, and that's going to be very difficult for active scientists and science education. You can't, although you can homeschool kids, that's great, but you can't do science in the kitchen very safely. There's some science, you know, cooking.
Yeah.
Great,
you haven't seen my baking.
Yeah, well, exactly, fantastic, and that's great. And there's lessons to be taught there, I'm sure, Diane. But it's very, very hard for kids to actually do science at home. Something that's happening in another university in the UK I'm working with is Liverpool University. And they've essentially replaced a lab full of chemists with a robot. It is a fantastic robot. It's not a very expensive robot. It's an off-the-shelf industrial robot. And there's a piece on the BBC news site today about this. They programmed this robot to not only do experiments, and it's done 700 experiments in the past, 2 weeks. This is proper chemistry experiments, but there's also design behind these experiments. So they've used a very clever computer to predict which experiments it should begin with and how to follow and where it should end. And what it's done is to make a catalyst for splitting water with light 6 times more efficient than it ever was before. And I think that's great. And so, you know, I think science can be done remotely, and maybe we should be thinking about clever ways of doing science without actually having someone in a lab in a white coat doing it all the time. You know, be clever and do it in a different way. But still, you know, because, yeah, frankly, kids at home could program that robot, and wouldn't that be cool? And they could program it to do some chemistry for them. Now, whether the University of Liverpool would let them loose on it, I don't know, but maybe they should.
I think that's great, and we have some terrific questions coming in around that very topic that I want to get to. But I want to talk first more of a generational question, because I'm curious, Gitanjali, from you. I mean, I know that you've been very engaged in science, but I am curious about what you feel the impact of the pandemic has been around the conversation, around the level of anxiety, just in general. What impact do you think this is going to have around how we talk about science?
Immense impact. That's like the first thing I'm going to say is again, we're going to find all these new norms in both the scientific field and also in daily life, like wearing masks, hand sanitizing more often, and just little things like that. And looking into the scientific field, we're going to be constantly looking for, I guess, new strains of viruses. We're going to be looking towards creating vaccines in advance. Something I was thinking about recently is like the flu vaccine. It's, you know, it's super effective most of the time. I do take the flu vaccine every year and still end up getting the flu. I don't know if it's me. I still every single year. It's like a cycle. Because I expect it all the same time in like March or April, I end up getting the flu. So it's crazy, especially because all these new strains are coming out constantly. So I was thinking, like, looking at predictive vaccines or adaptable vaccines to different strains. Like, isn't that amazing? So I guess people are going to be more hands down on that. And especially for, like, I guess you were talking a lot about the generational aspect too. So for us students specifically, I go to a STEM school as well. So these answers are going to be a little bit biased regarding the fact that there's a lot of students who absolutely love science and tech just like me. But it's hard not being in a lab like 24/7. I'm usually after, well, not everyone at my school does this, but after every Friday at school, I head over to the lab and spend hours there working on my, like, right now I've been working on a lot of biotech for a device called Epione, which is a prototype currently to help diagnose prescription opioid addiction at an early stage. And like Barry was talking about with the robots, that will make my life so much easier. But, you know, you can't really, like, that's one thing about artificial intelligence robots. I'm actually working with artificial intelligence on another app I'm creating to help detect and prevent cyberbullying. So I'm like, I want to intercombine everything, which I think is so awesome. But it's definitely going to shift. I went off on a tangent there, but it's definitely going to shift.
Not at all. That's the best science, going off on a tangent. That's
Yeah.
innovation.
I can keep talking about, like, I'll eventually end up at like llamas or something if I keep going. But that's exactly what I guess we're looking at right now, is just adapting to changes. And we were also talking about this earlier. Science changes and we have to change with it. We have to be open to that change and we have to accept that change and know that technology is always growing. And if we want to be stuck at what we're at right now, that's our choice. But if we want to grow to, like, my dream was always to, like, see some sort of flying car by the time I was like 20. So if we want to grow to those flying cars, we have to adapt to that change. We have to embrace that change. Like, I was absolutely fascinated by the SpaceX launch that happened. It was, I mean, I wanted to throw a party. That didn't happen, obviously. So it was me at home wearing a NASA shirt, absolutely enjoying the whole thing. We were making history there. We were using technology. I was just appalled by those super cool new suits that were less bulky and much less to maintain, and they're all their new technology to help take off. And that's really the future we're looking for, a future where we can change and we can adapt to the developments in science and technology to make more of those milestones and more of those breakthroughs. So I feel like that's what COVID's going to do to us more than anything. And I'm a huge optimist.
It's going to do what? It's going to make people more engaged?
It's going to make people more engaged, especially looking at, because we have time on our hands right now. And even though we can't be in the labs, we can't do things, we're always thinking. And this is time for, I guess, the entire world to grow. Like, we're not seeing it front end, but I just can't wait until, you know, the pandemic is over. We have a vaccine ready to go. We know new technology to keep going forward. And it might not be in the areas of, you know, rocket science, aerospace, but obviously the medical industry. We know how to, you know, prevent pandemics from like this from happening. So that's really what I was looking at it in this way.
No, I think there is, and I think there is a lot of excitement. And I actually want to go to Dr. Himiyama because I'm curious about this. One of the areas that I personally find most exciting, I was just thinking about with regard to accelerating digitization. And I know in Japan, for example, which has been very far along the path for automation and thinking about how it addresses the labor gap and how it addresses things like helping to care for people, the elderly and such. Modernization, which is something you touched on, Gitanjali, like, I'm curious to know, when you think about yourself, and it actually relates to one of the questions that's come in, what does it mean in your context to modernize the curriculum, and how has your own thinking advanced, you know, from the time you started to where you are today? I'd just love to get a sense of, because science is about evolution, and yet we often can approach it in a very traditional way. So do you feel like it's give a different understanding of science today than you did decades ago? And what do you think with regard to engagement as well? Dr. Himiyama.
Yes. I think the basis, the basic ideas, basic practices of science are very important. So the fundamental studies have to be done very well. But at the same time, the flexibility or open-mindedness to the new situations should be respected. The basis is very important. And that's the reason why actually I studied physics before coming to geography. I started actually, when I was 13 years old, I was most interested in philosophy.
Philosophy,
and
you know,
then, and
that's
then
very
I moved
interesting.
to biology and physics, and then environmental studies. Finally, I came to geography. And so it's a long way indeed. But I always wanted to know more widely. And in Japan, I was told, when I was actually interviewed, when I entered a postgraduate course, the chairman of the committee to select the students said, "I'm sorry, there is no place you want in Japan."
Really? Wow,
Yes,
that's encouragement.
that's the reason why I went to America to study.
You know, it's
And then I went to Britain to do my PhD, and yes, I could learn a lot, very broadly indeed, and the geography offered me that chance. I'm very happy with that. But ultimately, I really want to do philosophy, actually. Maybe when I really retire, then I'll go to there.
well, you know, Roger Martin, who started the Rotman School at the University of Toronto, always said he feels like the perfect degree for innovation is a joint degree in philosophy and physics. So he obviously had you in mind when he was thinking about that. And it is that blend of almost when we think about ethics, when we think about communicating and getting people engaged, because engagement is about engaging the wider society. It's about finding the applications and the relevance of science in our lives. And Barry, I'm going to go to you. When you think about how do we better both blend the different elements of science, bringing them together, bringing in the arts, have you thought of any examples that inspire you? Do you feel like the conversation has shifted in a way that's positive, or do you worry at all that sometimes, as we're talking about listening to the science, that we get too far away from what the facts of the matter are?
Yeah, okay, well, it's interesting, you know, over the years I've been working in science, there's a lot more to know. I mean, the number of journals published, the number of papers, the number of conferences expanded exponentially. And there was a time when I was doing my PhD, I could read all the literature in my field and be confident that I knew, not all of it, but I knew what was going on around the world and I could see what was happening. Out of the question now, there's just so much more to learn. Now, and that's positive and negative. No one person can know it all, but people do know it all. You know, collectively, we know it all. And I think that the clever thing is, and I think the very best scientists always do this, they forge connections around the world with people they need to know. How they find them, I don't know, but they do. And sometimes it's chance and sometimes it's cleverness, I'm sure. But I think all the best science happens at interfaces between different disciplines, different cultures, different people, different outlooks. And that's really important. And I know it happens because, you know, I was in charge of a very multinational, multi-center lab spread across the world. And those interactions are great. And we should definitely encourage those and make people aware of them wherever we can. Now, the good thing is that nowadays, this is just so much easier. You know, when I started my research career, if I wanted to talk to someone in the States, I had to talk to my manager, who would write on a piece of paper, Mr. Murrer would like to talk to Professor X in Wyoming, whatever. I allow him 10 minutes telephone time to call him. Goodness me, that was slow, wasn't it? Whereas nowadays, you know, I can talk to 20 people simultaneously around the world at no cost. And that's fantastic. So I think that's going to help science in the long run. I think it's going to help the understanding of science, and I think it's going to help people like Gitanjali invent more stuff, which is really important too, of course.
Well, you make a good point, which is that there's such a, I hate to use the term tsunami, but there is of stuff out there that it can induce paralysis because there is too much information, and it can cause anxiety as well, obviously, especially when people think about climate and the balance between optimism about the power to do things and the how, and then the kind of existential why kind of question and why bother. And it's been interesting with regard to the pandemic. And Gitanjali, I'm going to go to you again, and I'd love to hear everybody weigh in on this, but it is about the it's good that I can't even pronounce it. So politics and the impact of how we talk about science at this point, and it's both with the pandemic and otherwise. This isn't a conversation about Washington, but more generally, just the level of optimism and the level of how people feel like they can make a difference. And I'll tell you from here in New York, certainly there's been a sense of disengagement, disenfranchisement, and one of the really positive things to me around Black Lives Matter is sparking new conversations and making people more aware and more focused on the issues that matter. What if I were to put all of you, and Gitanjali, I'm going to put you in this chair first. You are the dictator of what our priorities are next. What would be your priorities, whether it's at a national level or a local level, as to what you think is going to help change the situation, make us more engaged around science, make us sort of move more toward the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you had no friction from Congress or anywhere else, what would you do?
For sure. So again, you know I'm an optimist. So what I will say is mental health is first priority. If you start out with a positive mindset or a positive attitude, it makes everything that much easier and that much more fun, essentially. It makes you more driven to do essentially anything you want to do. You can set your mind to it and do it. And that's how I start everything, especially when, you know, I feel lost or I feel like I can't get anywhere. Then you have to put that like positive thinking cap on and realize that, you know, I'm doing this for all of those people out there who are facing this current issue. I'm doing this to help other people. Like you were talking a lot about that existential why question, like why is this happening? I can't believe this is happening. And that tends, like you said, to put people in this like panic mode or cause more anxiety. And then you have to think more about that how. Like, and you were talking more about the why bother too. Like why bother do anything? Other people are solving this. And that's honestly what I thought first, and what a lot of people think is, you know, other people are going through this. I'll just sit around and wait until a solution comes out, or we figure out a way to help stop climate change. And sure, that's a valid solution. Like you can just sit around and wait, but why not help
Sitting around and waiting is a valid solution.
It's a okay
like
solution.
you.
Okay. It's like a if we were setting a bar, it's like over here. But then if we have like the worst solution ever would just be not caring. But that's why I said it's a valid solution. But then moving upwards from there is thinking, what can I do to make an impact? And that's what I'm absolutely loving about, you know, Black Lives Matter, as well as, you know, the protests for climate change too, that Greta was working on, and I think there were climate strikes, that's what they were called. And I thought that it was just so fascinating, like sparking conversation, first of all, and showing the motivation behind people, and showing that drive and passion behind people to do something about it. And that's exactly, like, I was reading the prompt for this conversation too, and we were talking more about emphasizing points to take it to, like, federal people and those decision makers and those lawmakers and what we can do. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're standing up for things that we believe in. And I think that that's why I said we're doing a great job engaging not only with science, but engaging with making a difference, engaging with innovation. We're finding new ways to influence those decision makers. Like for Tethys, when I created this lead detection tool, originally there were basically no federal regulations saying that you need to test for lead in schools. And I'm not saying it was just me who pushed this out. The amount of, I guess, like the amount of people telling others that, you know, lead in water is an issue. Like it started with maybe one device or maybe the Flint water crisis, and it slowly turned into a movement. People saying that there is lead in our drinking water and this is unacceptable, especially being that water is a basic right that everybody should have. And I totally agreed with it, and I totally pushed that idea forward. And you know, that soon, like, I guess every step and every action that people take does lead to an impact. It does lead to a change. And the first thing you need to do to get that change up and, you know, find that drive and passion within you to go for the problem you're personally attached to or you enjoy is a positive mindset in mind. So that was the first thing I would do if I was dictator of, like you said, your words, dictator of
we're
all positive changes.
So Dr. Himiyama, and I'm not, of course, you know, orchestrating a revolt here, but we do see a lot of grassroots excitement around a lot of these issues, but a lot of the decisions do get made top down, and sometimes there's a disconnect there. So I'm putting you now in the dictator. I'm not even going to use that term. I'm making you the person that sets the priorities for us, and I want to bring it back as well to a little bit about what Greta Thunberg was talking about, which is these are not supposed to be comfortable conversations. It isn't going to be easy. We can't have it all. So if you were to sort of, you've talked a lot about education, if you were to prioritize right now what you think would move the needle on engagement at a level that's going to make a difference, where would you be focusing your energies? And I'm thinking more from a top-down approach now versus the individual action, which of course is very powerful.
Well, it's not very easy to answer, but yeah, under the COVID-19 situation, I think we could learn a lot of things. And one of the things which we learned, not only in Japan, I suppose, is education suffered too much by that, unnecessarily. It's really bad. And there is the elementary school just behind my house. And for some months, about 3 months, it was so quiet. And I was very sad. It was totally unnecessary. And many specialists of not only education, but children's medical care and so on, they all said that the school closure was not necessary. But the dictators, the governor of the prefecture and the dictatorial prime minister of Japan closed the schools without proper explanations. It's top-down, typical top-down. It was illegal. They didn't do it by law. It's really terrible. And the children suffered a lot. Not only children, but their parents, especially the poorer parents, single mothers, they suffered a lot. And in other countries, WHO was saying that many people, students were starving because they couldn't get lunch. In Japan, it's a little bit different, but nevertheless, there was a problem of food indeed. And the shops which prepare the bread and so on for schools, they had to close down and so on, those things. And if it contributed to the fight against COVID-19, it may be justified, but there was no such evidence. So science must come in, but the politicians, sometimes they use scientists, sometimes they just ignore. So it has to be changed. And I am very happy to see the young people who speak. And especially Gitanjali, I like it very much. And we have to promote it, encourage it, because, you know, I'm 71 years old, and maybe I don't live more than 30 years, but the young people live much longer. And I don't think the adults now are not doing things responsibly. And the children must speak, because adults cannot always be trusted. And so I don't want to call it a generation gap, but the adults have to feel their responsibility and don't close the schools unnecessarily.
Yeah, I think you're right that there was no debate. And certainly I think the message that adults can't always be trusted is a good one to a point. But Barry, one of the things that it touches on is something that you mentioned actually, I believe before the call, which is, you know, there is the urgent right now, politically expedient, you know, instant gratification aspect of how we make decisions. And then there is the somewhat more scientific reality that even, for example, if we do all the right things, we may not see the payoff for decades. And how that is a disconnect that sometimes makes it very hard to motivate action and to engage. So what would you be doing to sort of keep us focused in the present on something that may not pay off for years?
Well, I'm very hopeful that this current virus-related crisis is going to help science and help people understand how science works and what science can do for them. If you think about it in the longer term, it's a very nasty disease, this, and it's sadly many people have died and become very ill. But it's not probably the biggest problem we're facing right now. I would say that is now climate change is our biggest problem. Both of these difficulties are going to be sorted by science in the long term. Hopefully we'll get a grip on the virus within the next few months, years, with a vaccine, and a much better understanding of how it's spread, how it behaves. Hopefully we can use that. We can use that knowledge and that breakthrough, if you like, to convince people that, okay, here comes the next problem, or here's the other problem, CO2. Here's some options which we can do about CO2. And believe me, you know, it's not irreversible. It is reversible. It's just going to take a long time, and a lot of effort, a lot of money, of course, and a lot of clever people to get there. But, you know, can we use the predicted success of science against the vaccine in due course to help people understand that, you know, science can also help with climate change? It's not hopeless. There are solutions out there. Yeah, I was talking to people the other day about greenhouse gases. Did you know that UK emissions of greenhouse gases today are lower than in 1889? You know,
Really? I did not know that.
Yes, absolutely.
This is because of the pandemic, or this is just more?
No, it's because of a policy, a long, slow policy change. We've stopped burning coal and we've moved towards renewables. We've got more solar, we've got more wind. So we're producing less CO2. And the path is towards net zero by 2050. Now, I'm not saying the UK is doing particularly well here. Other countries doing much better, but it's happening and there's a pathway. And I think, you know, we should try to help people understand that. And,
yeah, and it's the role of policy too. It's very powerful. We're actually getting near the end, so I want to give all of you some final comments. And just so I don't have the last word appropriately, because I should not, I'm not the expert here, but I will say, especially to everybody in the audience, to just, first of all, commend you on this overall exercise. I think the quality of debate that I saw this week was fantastic. And my own encouragement is to both continue the conversation and to really embrace the network that you've built here. And I'll say that on a personal level, because one of the most moments that engaged me with science was meeting Carl Hansen back at the University of Toronto, and I believe he came and slept on my floor in Nairobi, and that's how I got involved with UNEP. So kudos to Carl for that. Life is long, and there are many people out there who are doing great work. So I think the power is in numbers, and I hope you all continue to engage and have a chance to meet personally the people you've met this week. But I want to turn to each of our fantastic speakers and give you each some final words in terms of the message you want to convey to the audience, and also just generally how you're thinking about these things. And Gitanjali, I will go to you first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, in this last question, I truly took to heart what everyone said, especially with the idea of harnessing the uniqueness of youth. And I think that's where we should really be, focusing our time and energy. And I'll pitch out a request to you guys for people who are running organizations or a part of an organization. I suggest that you reach out to youth. I know that sounds weird, but I like to think of the idea that we're not limited in our brains. We don't have restrictions holding us back. So when we think outside the box, we think outside the box. And I think that's really what organizations need at this point, is someone to think outside the box, someone to come up with solutions. And that might be just opening up little internships, working with mentors, providing mentors to students. And if you are a student in the audience, I suggest you reach out to someone, reach out to a mentor, reach out to an organization. And that's basically where all of my research and all of my interest started, by reaching out and by talking to people. So if someone gives you a business card, hang on to it and email them back, write to them. I promise you they'll have an opportunity in store for you. So for the youth and organizations out there, I suggest that you find a way to come up with outside the box and creative ideas to solve problems and adapt to that change, learn from our science and technology, and just understand the pros and cons of every situation that we're in. It's time to come up with new solutions that no one's ever seen before. And to do that, we need to come up with creative solutions, and we need to just put a positive attitude on and, completely take over the world in the best way possible.
On taking over, I like that, take over the world. So Professor Himiyama, any final thoughts you have for the audience?
Yes, the first thing I have to say is thank you for inviting me to this marvelous occasion. And to be honest, I didn't know TSL until a few weeks ago. I'm very sorry, but now I know it, and I want to tell today's event to my colleagues in geography, so that the geography community will pay more attention to this marvelous opportunity. And you continue this every year, right? And
yeah, this is
I
the
hope
10th
that,
anniversary of this summit. I know that. So.
Yeah, and geography is a science, actually the mother of science. And so it should be the part of TSL, I hope.
Great.
Thank you very much indeed. And
Great,
final
terrific.
word to the participants of this event, the school students and also the teachers. Good luck. And the students, please do speak. Sometimes you don't have to trust adults. And you question the adults, and then work together also. And yes, let's go together.
Great. And last word goes to you, Barry.
Thank you. I'd just like to say something about connections. I think all of the best innovations in the world and the innovations to come will come from people who can make connections between ideas and people and processes. And I would like to say, I don't think it's ever been easier. So my advice to all the young scientists, aspiring scientists, not so young scientists, please do continue to make connections, exploit all the technology that comes along to help you. And I think we should have a very exciting future.
Terrific. Well, on that note, connecting the dots feels like a terrific way to end. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to our three speakers. You were fantastic. I certainly feel inspired, and good luck with the final day of conversation. And I hope, again, we can re-engage with this next year, and onward and upward. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks.
Talk to you
Bye.
soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.